Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Meher Sher and these are the headlines. India has reported this year's highest 459 deaths from COVID-19 and over 72,000 infections overnight. In Pakistan, 98 people lost their lives to the virus and nearly 5,000 tested positive since yesterday. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says COVID-19 vaccination will not be a prerequisite to perform the Umrah pilgrimage in Ramadan. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 128 million people. Taliban claimed to have shot down a Black Hawk helicopter of the Afghan military in southern Helmand province. A Taliban spokesperson says a key Afghan commander and 4 other soldiers were killed in the attack. Rejecting Taliban's claim, the Afghan Defense Ministry said 3 officials were killed when the helicopter made an emergency landing. In Myanmar, 2 military-owned shopping malls have been set on fire amid anti-coup protests in the country's largest city of Yangon. It comes after the UN Special Envoy warned of an imminent bloodbath because of military's crackdown. More than 530 people have died in violence since the February 1st coup. In the U.S. state of California, 4 people, including a child, have been killed and 2 others wounded in a mass shooting at a business complex in Orange City. Police say the suspect shooter is among those injured. They add the situation has been contained and there is no ongoing threat to the public. Well, those were the headlines. More news in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. And now for the news in more detail. We begin in India. India has reported this year's highest 459 deaths from COVID-19 and over 72,000 infections overnight. Brazil has yet again reported a record 3,869 daily COVID-19 deaths, pushing its toll to over 321,000. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 2.8 million lives and infected over 128 million people. More on the coronavirus pandemic in this report.
Record high COVID-19 deaths and cases have got the world on the ropes again. While many countries are desperate for vaccine supply, about 15 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's have reportedly been ruined due to a factory error in the USA. New study shows the rates of stillbirth and maternal death rose by 1/3 during the pandemic, with the most acute impact in poor countries. Meanwhile, as Brazil struggles with record numbers of cases and deaths, President Jair Bolsonaro railed against restrictions.
Essa política entendo eu.
This policy of isolation, restrictive measures with a curfew, with the suppression of the right to come and go, goes far beyond even a state of siege. I appeal to all the authorities in Brazil to review this policy and allow the people to go to work.
Over in Europe, Ankara says the variant first detected in the UK now accounts for 75% of all cases in Turkey. Finland has ruled out stay-home orders, choosing constitutional liberties over extraordinary containment measures. Meanwhile, as third wave weighs down, Belgian hospitals have been ordered to reserve 60% of ICU beds for COVID patients. EU's drug regulator's chief says the agency is investigating 62 reports of blood clotting after using the AstraZeneca vaccine.
A causal link with the vaccine has not yet been proven, but it is possible and further analysis is still ongoing. According to the current scientific knowledge, there is no evidence that would support restricting the use of this vaccine in any population.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia says COVID-19 vaccination will not be a prerequisite to performing the Umrah pilgrimage in Ramadan. India has now opened up its inoculation program to people above 45. Meanwhile, Beijing International Airport has shipped over 1,100 tons of vaccines to 41 countries and regions.
Whereas Pakistan has recorded nearly 100 COVID-19 deaths overnight, cases in the country continue to surge with nearly 5,000 people infected over the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the country's death toll has climbed to 14,530. The ministry said out of nearly 673,000 confirmed cases, over 605,000 have recovered. However, the number of active cases has shot up over 53,000. The country's positivity rate has also risen above 10%. And the Taliban claim to have shot down a Black Hawk helicopter of the Afghan military in southern Helmand province. A Taliban spokesperson says a key Afghan commander and 4 other soldiers were killed in the attack. He said the helicopter was targeted in retaliatory attack. Rejecting Taliban's claim, the Afghan Defense Ministry said 3 officials were killed when the helicopter made an emergency landing. Meanwhile, officials say 6 security personnel were killed and several wounded in separate Taliban attacks in the Herat province. In Jalalabad, unidentified gunmen shot a female police officer dead. Moving on, in Ethiopia, gunmen have killed 30 civilians and injured 15 others in an attack on a village in the west of Oromia region. Witnesses said most of the victims belonged to the ethnic Amhara community. Local authorities have blamed the attack on a splinter group from the opposition party, Oromo Liberation Front, but a spokesperson for the group has denied responsibility for the attack. The 2 neighboring regions of Amhara and Oromia share a border. Civilians from one ethnic group living on the other side of the border have been subject to attacks in recent months. And in the U.S. state of California, 4 people, including a child, have been killed and 2 others wounded in a mass shooting at a business complex in Orange City. Police say the suspected shooter is among those injured. In a Facebook post, the police said no officers were injured in the shooting. They said the situation has been contained and there is no ongoing threat to the public. In a statement, California's Governor, Gavin Newsom, termed the incident horrifying and heartbreaking. This marks the 3rd mass shooting incident in the U.S. in the last 2 weeks. Now, the UN envoy has urged Security Council to consider significant action in Myanmar, warning of an imminent bloodbath. This comes after 20 soldiers were killed in clashes with an ethnic minority insurgents. Envoy Schreiner Bergener told the Security Council that Myanmar's military is not capable of managing the country. However, the Chinese UN envoy rejected sanctions on Myanmar and called for a democratic transition. Meanwhile, the anti-coup protests continue across the country despite the military crackdown that has claimed 536 civilian lives so far. In India, 2 people have died in violence during the second phase of voting in eastern West Bengal state election. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's BJP and Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress are caught up in a fierce battle for the state. Hundreds of supporters of both parties clashed outside polling stations in Nandigram. Police said a worker for Banerjee's party was hacked to death while 3 BJP supporters were detained for questioning. They said a BJP worker also allegedly killed himself after he was threatened by TMC supporters. In another district, West Midnapur, police said BJP supporters raided a TMC camp, damaging their vehicles. The West Bengal polls are being held over 8 phases amid tight security and conclude on April 29th. The United States and the Philippines have discussed their shared concerns on South China Sea. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan called his Philippines counterpart Hermogenes Esperon over the phone to discuss the matter. The White House says the two counterparts agreed to coordinate closely in responding to challenges in the South China Sea. Washington pledged support to Manila in upholding a rules-based international maritime order. This comes after the Philippines described the presence of Chinese boats in the Whitsun Reef as a threat. However, China denied the allegation, saying the boats were merely sheltering from rough seas. Moving on, U.S. President Joe Biden's administration says it considers Israel's control of the West Bank as occupation. This comes after the release of the State Department's report that adopted language used by previous U.S. administration to downplay them. State Department spokesperson said the report on human rights used the term occupation in the context of the current status of the West Bank. In a press briefing, Ned Price said, considering Israel's control as occupations is a long-standing position of previous administrations of both parties. The recent report continued with the previously changed format of naming section on Israel and occupied territories as Israel, West Bank, and Gaza. The U.S. says it will continue to work with the UN and regional leaders to help bring about a sustainable ceasefire in Yemen. In a statement, State Department said the U.S.'s special envoy recently held productive meetings with Saudi, Omani, and Yemeni leaders. It said Tim Lender-King's discussions focused on inclusive political talks and a durable peace agreement in Yemen. Washington said the special envoy also emphasized the need to address Yemen's humanitarian and economic crisis. The statement also welcomed Saudi Arabia's announcement to provide over $422 million for fuel products in Yemen. And UN experts have expressed concern over reports of grave human rights abuses by the Russian-backed groups in the Central African Republic. In a report, the UN experts highlighted Russian contractors' connections to violent attacks following the national election. The world body pointed out that the offenses included mass summary executions, arbitrary detentions, and torture. They said forced displacement of civilians, indiscriminate targeting of civilian facilities, and humanitarian workers were reported. The UN condemned the acts and called for accountability to achieve sustainable peace and stability in the country. The U.S. says it is concerned about recent escalations of Russian aggression in eastern Ukraine. The Pentagon says it reached out to Russia to get more clarity over the situation. Chiefs of staff of the Russian and U.S. militaries held a telephone call to discuss the Russia-Ukraine border issue. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said the U.S. discussed concerns about the increase in ceasefire violations. The call comes as Ukraine and Russia is building up armed forces near its borders in a threat to the country's security. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken rang up his Ukrainian counterpart over the situation. He reaffirmed U.S. support for Ukraine in what he called the face of Russia's ongoing aggression in the Donbass and Crimea. Now, the U.S. says it will not be extending the license that authorizes transactions with its 9 state-owned enterprises in Belarus. The U.S. State Department says the decision follows the deteriorated human rights situation in Belarus. In a press briefing, State Department spokesperson said that Belarus has detained over 300 political prisoners. Ned Price said the violent tactics in the aftermath of the fraudulent 2020 presidential election in Belarus cannot be ignored. However, he said Washington's decision is reversible if Minsk takes necessary steps, specifically releasing all political prisoners. Price added the U.S. calls for the cessation of violence by the authorities against the Belarusian people. More stories after a short break. Stay with us. We're We're back. Slovak President Zuzana Kaputova has appointed Edward Heger as the new prime minister, ending a month-long political crisis. Heger has taken over from his party chairman, Igor Matovic, who has been made finance minister. The swap is aimed at quashing coalition disputes sparked by Matovic's purchase of the Russian coronavirus vaccine Sputnik V. Matovic secretly ordered a shipment of Russian COVID-19 vaccines his partners had opposed because they lacked clearance from the EU. And Brazil has named new commanders of its armed forces on the anniversary of the 1964 military coup. This comes a day after President Jair Bolsonaro sacked the previous three chiefs over suspicion of a coup plot. Brazil's new defense minister, Walter Braga Neto, made the announcements in a news conference. Neto said Paulo Sergio Nogueira de Oliveira will take over the army, while Elmir Garnier will take charge of the Navy and Carlos Almeida Batista Jr., the Air Force. Meanwhile, pro- and anti-Bolsonaro protests erupted across the country after he defended the coup and the 2 decades of dictatorship in his speech. In Kyrgyzstan, teams have gathered to participate in a local competition of KOK-BORU, a game similar to polo where a dead goat is used instead of a ball. Details in this report.
These are not the scenes of a medieval war movie, but of a competition of Kyrgyzstan's national sport KOK-BORU. It is an ancient game quite similar to polo, where horsemen score points by throwing a headless goat carcass into the opponent's goal. Over 30 teams have gathered for a 3-day tournament of KOK-BORU in the village of Sokoluk in Choy region of Kyrgyzstan.
As you can see, the traditional Kyrgyz game is going on. This winter we played games between different generations, villages and areas.
As one of Central Asia's most dangerous sports, KOK-BORU is not for the faint-hearted. Not only does it require incredible strength and skills, but also courage. Athletes also keep themselves well protected, as they are just one slip away from a serious injury if they fall off their horse.
The goat weighs around 35 kilograms. When it absorbed mud, it got all 40 kilos. The soil is heavy and wet. The goat is heavy and hard to lift. Good luck to the other teams.
KOK-BORU competitions nowadays are most usual for the Kyrgyz traditional festivals and the nomad games held on Lake Izkol in autumn.
On to the latest in the world of business. European stocks are trading higher following the global trend as market attention focuses on a raft of data releases from the region. London's FTSE is leading the gains, rising over 0.5%. The Pan-European Stock 600 has also gained close to 0.5%. Italy's FTSE MIB, Frankfurt's DAX, and the CAC 40 in Paris have edged up marginally. Earlier, all Asian markets advanced over positive sentiment at the start of the second quarter. U.S. President Joe Biden has proposed a $2 trillion investment in the country's economy. The plan is aimed at improving the nation's infrastructure and shifting to greener energy over the next 8 years. The spending will increase the corporate tax rate to 28% from 21% and change the tax code to close loopholes. Speaking in Pittsburgh, Biden called the plan a once-in-a-generation investment in America. He said it will generate historic job and economic growth and help businesses to compete globally.
We have to move now, because I'm convinced that if we act now, in 50 years, people are going to look back and say, this was the moment that America won the future. What I'm proposing is a one-time capital investment of roughly $2 trillion in America's future.
Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.